Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's Ascended World Collective Energy Share. This is Angela Coulter, and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
so we are excited because we have like a week and a half left till we are in Glastonbury with a amazing group of people who be incredible. I'm very excited. So the thing is, as we do when we go to Shasta, and we're all in this practice of oneness, and it's not just the Trinity practice. It's like everybody, pretty much. We all are going through these steps of whatever, this evolutionary shift. And whenever any group, gathers in these different places, it's like it affects everybody in some way, shape, or form because there's always a collective component. So whatever we've been going through, we've obviously been doing it to prepare ourselves for whatever's coming.
Right.
So I don't even know where to start though. We were going to talk, we were going to get on and do an extra one last week and we did not. And what were we going to talk about?
I think it had to do with this authenticity and its connection with self-love.
So,
And one of the things that I kept seeing was that your capacity for authenticity is directly related to your capacity for self-love. And that how can you possibly reach expansion in your authenticity if you aren't expanding your self-love?
yeah. And it's funny because I loved, like, one of the awesome posts of Kim Turner last week was that, like, at some point you get to the place where like, you don't care what other people think. You don't care, like, you don't have to do anything to prove yourself. You don't have to value yourself based on somebody else's opinions. You can
Right.
just you're in a place of happiness and joy just being, right? And that's really that
Right.
authenticity. Like, there's been so many messages about that coming through, which is really important. And the challenge is, and I know we talked about that last week with the levels of authenticity and how many layers there are and stuff like that. Uh,
It's I was reading something over the weekend and it was about Greta Thunberg, the environmental activist. And it actually was a comment to her from somebody, and it said, in Tibetan Buddhism, a warrior is somebody fearless enough to go through life authentic with an open heart, never afraid of what people think. And I thought that really fit with everything that we were talking about and how she has so embraced her authenticity, even when her parents were like, you're on your own.
well, and it's interesting because funny that, of course, with this whole theme, I like every conversation that I had last week had to do with authenticity in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, I did a share with somebody last week where we were talking about this individual is living in an apartment, a 55 and over apartment community, and she was talking about the that they're like somebody said she got into some weird disagreement with somebody, and then she was like, well, no, the other person was like, well, nobody likes you, and like it was just like this whole, like, so high school, right? And then
Right.
yeah, and there's these groups of people, and they gossip about other people, and I try not to be a part of that, um, but it really took her back to hear that, right? Because why we always think, well, why I need to be liked, right, or
Right.
whatever, and
Right.
accepted. And I said, well, what if it is they feel uncomfortable around you? Like I said, and first of all, it's probably an unfounded statement anyway, but I said, what if people feel uncomfortable about you because you are, like, not wanting to gossip about other people? Like, does that make you wrong? Does
Right.
that make you, like, non-valuable? It has nothing to do with that. Um, what about like, and this person was telling me how she doesn't really ever talk about any of this stuff with anybody there because like apparently like somebody talks about energy or something and they think she's doing black magic or something like that. I was like, well, here's the thing. I was like, he said, like what is it? I said, see me, I just have the personality where I would just play with that totally, right?
Oh, yeah.
I would just be like, oh yeah, I'm a witch,
Right. Right.
because by some culture standards, I am. I was
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
I'm like, so it's just a term and it's got a definition or not or whatever. And I said, so whatever is whatever. And when we're looking at the wholeness, I mean, it's just so funny. But the core to that point was, I was like, the key is to get to this place where you don't care what they think. Like,
Right.
because when you get to a place of self love and comfort with who you are and what you are and how you are, then you don't care what other people think about you, right? So,
Right.
yes, that
Right.
means people don't like you. That's gonna make people very uncomfortable with you, especially if they're not authentic with themselves and you reflect back to them what they're not doing with themselves. That
Right.
makes them uncomfortable. And so there's like such a different way for us to look at all this stuff. And it's really funny because we don't realize how like, oh, how motivated we get by, oh well, I'll just do this so they'll like me, right?
Right. Right.
Or I'll act this way so they'll like me. And that's really not our jobs. Our job is to like ourselves, right?
Right. Right.
And the thing is, if we can't even if we can't even allow ourselves to talk what feels natural to us, right? To talk about what comes from our heart, then how can we ever fully realize what we came here to embody?
Yeah. Well, oh, exactly. Exactly.
Like, and I used to say, I remember I used to say all the time because, I love going home to Mount Shasta, love, like that feeling of, and any of these energy points, a lot of them, it's like, and a lot of us go there and we take this big breath of relief of, oh my gosh, like I could go to the gas station and the person behind the counter will start talking about energy, whatever, like,
Right. Right.
and it's, oh my God, it feels so natural to be able to be myself. But the thing is, no, the key is to be myself like that all the time.
All the time. Right. Right.
And to be so comfortable in that I don't care if somebody feels uncomfortable around me around it. So I don't know. There's something out there's a lot, and we get still there's still I've been watching just a lot of ego, so much ego
Right.
caught up in
Right.
all this stuff.
Well, and I think the closer we get to amassing more and more who are embracing that authenticity, the divide gets bigger. And so that those that are on the still on the egoic path can't help but feel threatened because it's becoming more and more acceptable to come from a different place.
And there's so much. I was talking to somebody last night, and I said, there's so much, and there's so much now of. In fact, it was somebody actually. I had another conversation I had last week where it was like funny how we've gone from the, like the Jen Cunning, so she'd be like, "Oh, I am spiritual." Like I always laugh about that,
Right.
right? We were talking last week, and she's like, "Yeah, and we've been looking at in ourselves, actually going from that to no, I know more,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right.
or I know better." And that's such an ego thing, and that's what we, like the judgment, and we think, and it's like, I had a conversation with my husband over the weekend, and I can't remember what prompted this because he started talking about how, oh, yeah, it was a book he's reading that I've read, and he said, and these characters and da da, and he's like, and it's interesting how we automatically make judgments about people because, and he was talking about it like from the science. He's like, well, so one person is really practicing this one science, and this other person's really practicing this other science. Well, which one is smarter? Neither. It's just like who's had the practice in those areas. And I said, well, that's the same thing. And so he's like going on and on about it. He's like, we're all equally intelligent and equally able. Like it's just finding our rhythm with it. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, you realize this is what I talk about all the time, but on the spiritual side.
Right, exactly.
He's like, no. I goes, no, I know. And I'm like, and that's the whole thing is like, I'm like, and people always say, oh, well, I don't remember as much as you, or I don't know as much as you, or I don't know as much as this person, or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You just haven't remembered it yet.
Right,
Or you have no need to remember it yet. Or because, like I use it every day, I flex that muscle every day. When you flex that muscle every day, you get really ripped. So it's just
right,
so, but the thing for us to do is to take the ego out of it and really get to this place of really that equality, that divine equality. And that's sort of a feeling like, and when we're in that authenticity, we can do it.
right. Oh, it's almost like you don't even notice anything but that authenticity when you're in that space.
So I don't know I'm not quite sure what there is for us to tweak today. If it feels like there's something, because I can feel like in my heart, and it feels like a rumbling underneath, you
Right.
know?
Almost, I don't know. I feel like we're expressing how important it is and how um, game changing it is and critical for moving forward. That the ego, in an attempt to dissuade all that, goes, oh, then it must be hard. It must be unachievable, or everything's going to change, and so maybe you don't want to do that. And I find it quite the opposite. And maybe that's the rumbling, is the allowing the ego to have a different understanding that it's part of shifting the ego's job in finding this authenticity, because then it becomes defending the authenticity.
Right, right. Yeah, and what if we just like, and so many people say, how do I even start with this? Like,
Right,
some people don't even know what their authentic self is because we're so
right,
hidden in these layers of, no, well, I am authentic. I'm a great mom, or I'm a great this, or I'm a great spouse, or I'm a great whatever. And it's like, but what are you if you didn't have that? Are you
right,
still are you still do you still believe you're awesome without that?
right.
What if like somebody took away everything that you had today? Would you still be able to believe that you were amazing and awesome and
Right.
divine?
Yeah, I had a share over the weekend with someone who was letting go of that motherhood role, and it was so ingrained in them. And finally, in the share, it was a question of, but they are part of you, and if you just continually, in looking at them, use it as a mirror to see yourself and and allow your allow you to channel everything you channeled into them into you, to be that mirror for them. And it was like, once they were able to turn that around and realize that their most valuable asset was themselves, everything changed. Everything changed.
Yeah, that does change everything. Well, and yeah, and we sit there, and it's so funny because we will argue. The ego argues and fights for it. Oh yeah, no, but I love being a mother. I love doing like, and it gets really vehement, and it's like, okay, that's fine. And what are you beyond that?
Right.
well, do I have to be anything else? It's like, well, it's just a mother is just one tiny little part of, you know,
Right. And it's actually an illusion too, because your kids are you.
right, right. And they have also come here to was what the biggest discussion for on that when I talk to people about that is realize I was like, well, what if I do this and da, da, da. It's like realize your kids chose you as a parent, so whatever you choose is something they chose too to
Right.
experience,
Right.
whatever
Right.
that is, whatever that looks like. Whatever changes you implement, whether you go from one extreme to another or whatever, that's all what they chose. I mean, I had to come to that with the very caustic and bipolar kind of childhood that I had,
Right.
and realize, well, I chose that for whatever reason. It
Exactly.
helped me get to where I am today.
Right.
So that's also part of our authenticity too, right? That we're sometimes reticent to accept, to say,
Right.
no, I created that too. Like, and there's a
Right.
purpose, even as shitty as it feels or whatever to the ego.
Which I found that the whole thing, you know, the self awareness, the self acknowledgement, the self observation, self love all comes into authenticity, which then spirals out into a bigger self awareness, self acknowledgement, self responsibility, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but you still go through the same steps, just at a bigger basis, which leads to
Right,
an increase in authenticity.
right. Well, and that's part of what we were talking about last week too, is that we can only be as authentic as where we are right now.
Exactly. And that
And
doesn't make it wrong
no,
or any less. It's just
it's
part of the
funny.
process.
I know of people, or I know people who, over the years, I've watched or been a part of the circle. Excuse me, there's a big yawn. Um, who've been who? It's funny. You're if you commit yourself to be authentic to where you are right now, right? Sometimes you're still not seeing parts of yourself that you still haven't seen. So there's still stuff to be done to shift, right? So it's
Right.
funny. I can think of somebody in particular that I know that would that there were several people who were like, oh well, this person's so inauthentic and she's so blah blah blah. And I'm just like, no, actually, she's pretty much who she is right now. And it's like, well, but she's got the, and it's like everybody wants to judge.
Right.
And I'm like, well, so what are you triggered by this person being in their authentic shoes as to who they are right now?
You're
And
off in authenticity.
are you not being, who you
Right.
want to be? And whenever I say that, then they get pissed at me. So, a lot of times they get pissed at me. So, are you there? I think, but I will just continue talking. And so, are you with me, Sarah? I don't hear you either. But yeah, and then sometimes they get really triggered when you say that to them to say, well, well, then what is it within you that's really irritating yourself? Like that's getting you irritated about what that person's reflecting back to you in that place of where they are authentically right now. And and sometimes it really triggers somebody because they really want to point the arrow at the person. So this also goes back to that self-responsibility, like Sarah was saying, and that spiral that she was talking about, because the whole the whole thing is, if I am triggered by somebody else and where they are. Yes, Sarah says my internet is balking at this subject apparently. Apparently, because she just texted on. So I will just continue talking while I'm hoping she gets back on. But yeah, and so like whenever we're triggered by somebody, whenever we want to sit and talk about like somebody else and say, oh, well, this person doesn't do this or they do this or whatever, when we're judging somebody else, the thing for us to do is really to look in the mirror and say, so what is that causing me to trigger? Like, why do I care? Right there, it goes back to our basic questions of why do I care? Why do I care what that person is doing? If they are doing like, and by the way, it's their choice, and I can choose to interact with them or not. Um, but it's interesting how triggered somebody will get, and then if you don't try to um, like side with them, then they get very agitated a lot of times. Are you with me, Sarah? I see you're up here, but no video. I don't hear you. And I've had those conversations, and I'm just like, so, and I've had like conversations when somebody has brought somebody else up, that we both know and that I know very well, and I'd be like, I don't see it. Like, I understand what you're saying, but why are you so triggered by this? So that's always the key. If we look at somebody, and even whether they're authentic or inauthentic, right? It's always to look back into what we are irritated about, because sometimes it is about what we're not being authentic about within ourselves. Like, oh, well, I have this ability. Like, so here's some really deep thoughts that I'm just going to continue talking about. So hopefully Sarah can get back on. Some deep thoughts that we don't really like let come to the surface a lot are things like, I can do that too. I could do that too, or I could be that kind of person too. But then the question is, so then why aren't you? And why are you irritated that they are and you're not? Um, Things like I can be like, yeah, and it's a lot of the me too. Like I could do this too, or I would never do that, or that person is just being so false about this, and then it's like, well, so then what are you being false about in your own life? That's really, like that you're holding deep down. So, um, and then there are all these things about, well, that authentic self comes to us based on how much we can. So it says Sarah's here. Are you here, Sarah? Oh, there you are.
Yay!
It's like, I'll continue talking. Like, oh, I'll just continue to talk. And now I forgot what I was going to say. Uh, oh, yeah. And sometimes we hide our inauthenticity by claiming, everything's fine as long as things are like this, right? So that means
Right.
as long as I'm married to this person, or I'm with this person, or as long as I'm in this job, or as long as I'm whatever. But that's the thing to always ask ourselves is, if this was taken away from me tomorrow, am I still like happy? Am I still a divine being? Am I still whole and
Right.
able to be, fully realized without that? And many times, like, people say, like you say, well, if you took your kids away, if your kids were gone tomorrow, what would you do?
Right. Right.
If your husband or your wife was gone tomorrow, what would you do? If your whole house or your whole career or whatever was gone tomorrow, what would you do? And the funny thing is, if you look around, what are the things that are stressing people out right now, or having like major crises about, are these things are getting taken away from them because the
Yep.
higher is going, yeah, it's time for you to look in the mirror and do this without your dependence on somebody else for your happiness.
Right.
So that was my little spew while you were gone.
I watched a little bit on my phone while everything was resetting. Um, I I don't know this. It's like I think people are hoping for a how-to, and it's so individual, and it is, but it isn't. I know that just from my personal experience, it's all about me, and it's all about what really makes my heart sing, and it's not what you think. And I know that sounds silly, but it's not the things you can touch and feel. It's all comes from inside.
Right.
And it's I started by saying, well, what's my favorite thing? And it was like I found when I started answering that question is being asleep.
Yeah, I know
And
you
that kind of took me back, but it was even as a child, I that was my escape. And it's not like I slept all the time by any means, but it was like I just loved that. And it was so then I started saying, okay, what about that do I love? And it was like it's escape from the drama, escape from the judgment, and it's like, oh, I'm sensing a theme here. And so how can I make my waking hours equally less dramatic, less judgmental? And as I started peeling that back, it was like, wow, it can be the same. It can be the same. And then, it's like, okay, well, I only like my weekends. Okay, well, what is it about Monday through Friday that you don't like? Well, is it that's when the drama, and it really in doing that exploration made a difference.
Yeah. And a lot of times when we look at that, like I've noticed, like it's, and it's so funny because little tiny crumbs will make me take notice now, right? Because I'm so used to that flow. So it doesn't matter whether it's a little tiny crumb or some big, massive, like vomitous, whatever, right?
Right,
It, it's a matter of like, I'll look into something and be like, I don't like when you hear the thought, I don't want to do this, right? Then I
right,
look away at like, I'll look right away at why don't I want to do this?
right.
Oh, because
Yeah, exactly.
I believe it's too hard, I believe this, or it's uncomfortable, or there's some kind of a fear of judgment, or, it's like, oh,
Or it's
wow,
confrontational,
right, right,
or I have to speak up for my truth, which I'm not that comfortable with yet. Yeah,
yeah. And that's the key is whenever we feel, so it's funny because there are so many fine lines in terms of consciousness that, it's important to keep an eye on, like we were talking last week. Um, and I talked about this on my podcast. We talked about this on Monday, was where you had said about, like at some point you just decide I'm not going to give energy to something that drives me down, right?
right,
And
right,
talk about when we're talking about like, sickness or discomfort or whatever. And then Thursday, and then you and I have been talking about it, it's like, yeah, and there's a caveat that we both like have on that too, is there's a fine line with that of recognizing that it's there and or like and just not giving it more energy
right,
and or just not talking about it because we're afraid of giving it more energy, which means it then has power over us, so the more we actually repress it, the
right,
more give it power by doing that. So there's a very fine line of consciousness there to say, okay, well, I'm just not going to give it energy, but I'm also not going to hide it in the closet either.
right. And I do think that gets into, am I just denying it, or am I not letting it have power over me?
Right. Right. And that's a really important piece, it's a very tiny little tweak, but it's a very important piece for us to be conscious of because then that also translates over into like what we're resisting, right? Because
Right,
what's one of the things that the ego then tries to fool us into is, oh well, maybe I'm just not supposed to do that. I don't feel like I'm supposed to do that.
yeah, right,
And I always tell people is to be very conscious about when you make a decision about doing something, listen to your gut, right? Listen to your feelings and your cells and say, so is it a contractual, like a contracting feeling when you say, oh, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not getting to that, or whatever? Or is it just a simple, smooth and flowing, yeah, it's we should do something else, right?
right,
Because it's very
right.
different energy. When you're like,
It really
no,
is.
I'm going to do that, there's this contracting. That would mean no, which means there's resistance. When there's resistance, the key is there's ego. So when we say, okay, so why don't I want to do that? That's a very fine line too. Is to be very conscious. These are very important tweaks. Be very
Well,
conscious
and
of,
I also find that the closer I get to that place of authenticity and operating from there and living from there, that I find that the things that have made me contract aren't an issue anymore, and sometimes my response in those circumstances surprises me because it comes from such a different place and
right,
feels so natural that it just flows.
right.
which that feels really good.
Yeah, yeah, and it changes our energy so much, right? Because then our decisions are so clear and easy.
Right, right, exactly. Well, and automatic.
Yeah, yeah, because then we don't sit there and go, huh, well, I don't know, maybe I'll think about, like, and it's like, well, it was like a conversation I was having where somebody was asking me if I wanted to do something, and I like right away I like got no, right? But then I'm humming and hawing. I just got no that it wasn't for me, and there wasn't resistance to it. It was like, yeah, it's not for me. But then because I like this person and whatever, I was like, I'll hear you out, and it was like a business opportunity thing. I was just like, it's not for me. And but yet at the same time, then there's that still little piece of you that's like, okay, but I'll be nice and I won't say no right up front. I'll say I'll look at it, even though I already know the answer is no, but okay, and I'm just like, okay, well maybe I missed something or I don't know. Anyway, so it's really funny when we look at those interactions with people instead of just like being where you are. It's like, okay. And actually, I was pretty like neutral. I said I'll take a look at it, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to promise anything. And that's really, I look at where, even if I feel the littlest twinge, what am I feeling a twinge about? Do I want this person to like me? Am I feeling I don't want to hurt this person's feelings? Is it blah, blah, blah? And it's
Right,
like no, yeah, it has to do with where we are. So maybe that's where we focus this week, which is really the clarity and understanding of being able to see those little pieces that we still hold in us that like allow us to perpetuate even little tiny pieces of inauthenticity
right,
so that we can be self-aware in them and observant so that we can just shift them and recognize them and shift them so that we can then really get into this new practice of being that way all the time.
right,
That feels
right,
good.
right. That feels good.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go do that, shall we?
Yep.
Ah.
Wow.
That was a lot more. What I kept on seeing was that we were wearing clothes that were too small for us, right? Wearing, like it was really funny. It was like, and then we put on clothes that were too big. It was like so like finding this right, like no, this is what I like. This is what I am. This is,
Right. Yeah.
and it and as that started to happen, it was such a ripple effect. Like it was like these three people, and then they were able to get together from that place to do this, and then it was just like this bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger um, relation, which is what I feel like is part of the whole Glastonbury thing too, which will be powerful.
Right.
That was
Right.
really nice. Here, my cat was like came in and started chirping, and he's like playing with me,
Right.
playing also, and of course I'm like, well, so of course we have to incorporate play whenever the cat comes in because that means oh, there's play. Play is part of authenticity too. So.
That's right.
But my heart, that was quite an expansion, and there was.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
Clearly.
you would really describe what I saw. It was really nice. See anything to add to?
I just felt like the expansion was just almost overwhelming. And I kept feeling myself getting a little bit uptight and I kept going, but no. And it was like, just relax into it. And it was like the more I would relax into it, the more it would expand. And it just was almost overwhelming.
Yeah. So that's everybody's home life is to be, excuse me, is to really be observant and stay in this energy of being observant to all those little tweaks of where we're not being authentic with ourselves, with others, or whatever,
Right.
and just to be very conscious with wherever you feel a little tweak, a little weirdness, resistance, avoidance, like, and to say, okay, so where is this? Why is this coming up, and where is it preventing me from being authentic?
Right. Yeah. 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 And then practice feeling into things. Like you said, am I just avoiding this? Am I denying it? Or is it really just not congruent with me anymore?
Right,
Right.
right, very good energy. Yep. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Enjoy the week. Can't wait for next week because that's going to be,
The big one.
the big one. All right. Have a great one. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnoni.
signing off with this week's Ascended World Collective Energy Share. Thanks. Have a good one.